most often throughout the year is, what do we do about workers? Worker shortage, labor, big issue. But I'm surprised there's not many people here for that, with all the questions and complaints I get about it all the time. So hopefully they'll filter in. I think the roasting workshop is completed. I want to say thank you to our platinum sponsors: Honolulu Coffee Company, Kauai Coffee Company, Pepe Machinery, Satake, UCC Hawaii, and Matson Navigation. And thank you again to Tradition Coffee Roasters for the coffee break coffee. Thank you. So next up we have modern tools for H2A with a focus on compliance. A company called Seso. Gentlemen are Michael Guirguis and Jordan Taylor. Please join me in a warm welcome. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us here. We're excited to talk to you about H2A and labor broadly and how to deal with the labor shortage and handle compliance. Before we get started, show of hands if labor is an issue for your farm. Okay, some hands up. And how about H2A? Is anyone using the H2A program here? Okay, great. So we'll spend some time trying to introduce the program before we talk about compliance in the weeds. But the agenda today is we're going to give you an introduction to H2A broadly, and we're going to definitely leave time at the end for Q&A and try to answer any questions you might have about it. We're going to introduce our company to you and tell you what we do and what role we play within the H2A process. And then we're going to talk about audits specifically. So we were initially invited to talk about labor compliance and dealing with labor audits, but we thought it would be helpful to also give a bit more background on H2A before we dig into that. So my name is Michael, by the way. I'm the CEO of Seso. We started this company about 3 years ago, trying to help my cousin grow her farm in California, and labor was the biggest issue that she faced. And the more time I spent with her, the more it became clear that the H2A program was the future of labor, and I wanted to make it easier and use technology to try and streamline that and make the program more accessible to growers across the country. So a little bit about how H2A works today. So this is a visa specifically for agricultural labor, and this is the only uncapped visa. So if you are a landscaper, you need to bring in workers. If you're a truck driver, a trucking company that needs to bring in workers, there's a cap. H2A has no cap, so you can, in theory, bring in as many workers as you need. And you're applying through the Department of Labor initially. And so first, you're showing the Department of Labor, we have a shortage of domestic workers, and once that's clear, then you can get approval to get visas and bring in foreign workers. So the second thing you have to do once you have approval is work either by going and recruiting your own workers or working with an agent to recruit workers. The H2A program predominantly brings in labor from Mexico, but the Northern Triangle is also a big user of the program, so Guatemala and El Salvador, South Africa, Jamaica. There's about 10 countries we bring in workers from, but I think there's about 20 countries that are prominently using the program. And then once you have approval from USCIS and your workers have visas, you transport the workers to your site, and they need to be provided with housing and transportation. So those are kind of like the big things to know about H2A is you are bringing in foreign workers, but you do have to provide housing, and you do have to get approval from several different government agencies. So a little bit about H2A. H2A started out in about the late 80s and was a very small program, and there's 4 different government agencies involved. It's always been fairly complex, and I think nobody in the government ever expected it to take off the way that it has. So today there's about 350,000 H2A visas approved, but like I said, it's an uncapped program. And if you talk to economists or some of the CEOs of some of the biggest farms in the country, they all say, this country is going to be 100% H2A in 5 years. So whether that's literal or not, who knows, but every state is actually bringing in more and more H2A workers each year. And during the pandemic, every visa was banned from entering the country except H2A for a period of time. H2A was the only visa that grew, and it's kind of just a signal of how dire the labor crisis is for our industry versus other industries. So why consider H2A labor? So there are additional costs bringing in H2A workers that you don't have to deal with a domestic workforce. Specifically, you have to pay fees to apply for the visa, and you have to provide housing for those workers. But there is a return on the investment that most growers will tell you. So there's a few reasons behind that. One is it's a very reliable workforce. So about 99% of H2A workers will complete the entire season. Retention is an issue for a lot of growers, and this is less of an issue when you use an H2A workforce. And the reason for that is because these workers want to come, work, go home, come back the next season. So they want to complete the season through, and they have the lowest rate of overstaying their visa of any demographic. So you're 5 times more likely to overstay a tourist visa and 7 times more likely to overstay an H-1B visa as a software engineer. So this is a workforce that wants to come, work, follow the rules, and go back home. The second thing is it's a younger workforce. So on average, H2A workers are 10 years younger than domestic workers. That changes by crop and state, and sometimes you actually see it 15 years younger. And then lastly is purchasing power. So the workers are predominantly sending their money back home to Mexico, to El Salvador, Guatemala, and so the purchasing power of getting $18 an hour or whatever the wage is and sending it back home is the equivalent of getting paid $55 to $60 an hour. So there's several structural reasons why the H2A workforce is highly productive. There are other things I didn't want to put on a slide, but they're 3 times less likely to file a workers' comp claim. So there's a lot of reasons why you see this workforce, like people who use the H2A program, continuing to use it and grow their programs, because even though there's more upfront cost, long-term there's a return on investment. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about our company and what we do within the H2A program, and then we'll get into really exciting stuff around audits and labor compliance. So we're an all-in-one H2A solution. So what we mean by that is if you want to use the H2A program, you need to file a visa, you need to recruit workers, and you need to do onboarding and do kind of different steps for compliance. And we handle all of that for you in an a la carte model. So you can say we're going to recruit our own workers, or we have referrals from our existing workers, but we need you to take care of the visa filing and the logistics process of getting workers from the home country to here. And then we have software which is pretty unique to modernize this program. So if you were to go to a traditional immigration lawyer today, you would try and navigate the program through emails and wouldn't be able to track anything going on. And so we've built modern software to track the entire process end to end of filing for an application, seeing where your workers are they on the way to the consulate, is there any holdups? So the most important thing is that you know if you're going to have your workers on time and if you're going to be approved for the number of workers that you requested, so that you can predict, do I need to supplement this with other sources of labor? And so we focus a lot on just providing a very transparent program and a transparent process through our software. And then we also help with taking care of all of the paperwork to onboard workers, both H2A and domestic. So I-9s, job contracts, anything like that is digitized and then stored so that you're also ready for an audit. So a huge part of the H2A program is dealing with audits and being compliant, because you can get audited by the State Workforce Agency, the Department of Labor. So there's a lot of different audits that you need to be ready for. And so that's something that we focus on as well. And then also having a team on the ground in Mexico that is helping with recruitment and worker logistics and taking care of that consulate process. And then longer term, we're building payroll and insurance brokerage and kind of trying to provide everything that you need to do to manage both an H2A and domestic workforce in one place through a modern software like HR Stack. And we are, very grateful to be invited here by some of our customers who are in the room, but we work with employers all over the country. And so one of the cool things about our model is we learn what's going on in the H2A program nationwide, what the DOL is enforcing in Florida that's going to hit Hawaii or California next, and try to share those learnings with all of our customers. So just a little bit about how that software works is there's several fields that you need to have prepared to apply for H-2A workers. So you need to explain the job duties, you need to explain the dates, the hours, you need to list all of the fields that these workers can work on, and then get the right insurance. And so we kind of streamline that process of getting that prepared for you, and then have a dashboard that walks you through all the steps that you need to do and gives you a timeline of like when something is due. So even if you're new to the H-2A program, you're kind of handheld walking through the process through the software. And then if you get audited, and this is what we're going to spend the next section of this presentation on, how do you deal with an audit and what is the audit going to ask for? So traditionally, if you get audited, people are going through file cabinets and photocopying stacks of papers, and we've created a digital audit report, so you can click a button and remove about 3 weeks of work and have everything ready to go for the audit. And so Jordan's going to come up and actually explain a little bit more about audits. This is obviously applicable for both H-2A and having a domestic workforce, but they're particularly difficult with H-2A, and so we want to explain that a little bit more.
Thanks, Michael. So my name's Jordan Taylor. I'm a co-founder at Seso, and I lead the software development team. I've also spent years immersing myself in the, as Michael said, super exciting, scintillating topic of H-2A compliance. So we've worked with hundreds of customers, seen every type of application, and we've built software that helps employers ensure that they're going to proactively stay compliant with the labor laws. Because I know a lot of folks in the room have not yet used the program, I'll try to keep it fairly high level. And I think just to reiterate something that Michael said, oftentimes people are reluctant to try H-2A because it is highly regulated, and it can be quite intimidating to look at this program that you know very little about and think about, I have to do the application, I have to get workers in, then I have to stay compliant. And part of the reason that graph that Michael showed is going so far up and to the right is that slowly over time, people who adopt the program are pretty blown away by the ROI because the labor force is there when they say they're going to be there, they're highly motivated, they're highly productive. And then once you get a hang of the program year over year, it's actually very, very doable to stay on top of everything. And then with the advent of a software program like this, you're not doing it alone. So you have structure, you have guardrails. And the last kind of comment on that before I dive in is, I think it's somewhat similar to when we file taxes. Many of us use TurboTax, right? So back in the day, you'd either hire somebody to do all this for you, or you'd have to go through all the paperwork and try to figure it out, which is quite difficult. And it's the same thing with our platform. So the platform is aware of all the different regulations. It helps keep you structured, and then it tries to proactively alert you when something is not up to date. So why do we care about compliance? Well, the long and the short of it is that the Wage and Hour Division, which is part of the Department of Labor, will inevitably come on site and actually conduct an audit if you participate in H-2A. It sounds super scary and intimidating, but it definitely does not need to be. So they have the authority to enforce all of the federal labor laws, but usually, like predictably, they're honing in on several things that the software helps track related to the H-2A program. So as I said, they do show up unannounced. They may meet with workers. The main thing is that they'll request a bunch of records from you within 72 hours. And so the platform makes it really easy to very quickly generate everything that you'd need. And this is an example of what a government audit can look like. So if you're not acclimated to it or you're not using the platform, it can seem intimidating at first glance. So again, the best way to be prepared is we encourage all of our customers to keep an audit file up to date. All of our customers are using this digitally through the software, but even when I talk to folks who are in the H-2A program that are not Seso customers, I just encourage them no matter what to keep an audit file up to date. So this could even be a physical binder. And to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, this would have copies of the workers' compensation insurance associated with the workers on the contract, all of the visa application forms, and then various pieces of information about the workers who actually were on the contract. So I think this section will probably be the most useful and interesting out of my part of the talk here. And this will just kind of give you a taste of some of the regulations around H2A. So I've said that it's a regulated program. It can seem intimidating. So what are these regulations that people try to learn about? So one example is transportation. And so as an employer, you're actually responsible for either reimbursing workers or paying for all the inbound and outbound transportation into the United States and out of the United States. As Michael said, we work with a few Hawaiian growers, and it's actually pretty straightforward streamlining this with the airline tickets, with the meals, with the lodging. So this is something that we do across the country and have specialty with in Hawaii. So then once the workers are in the United States, you also need to transport them from where they live to the work site. So pretty straightforward here, where the government wants you to track which vehicles were used, who drive those vehicles, and then you want to keep records on file around were the vehicles inspected, are they insured, was the insurance non-expired. Reimbursements, I mentioned this, but you also just want to keep pretty meticulous records if you adopt the program around what you paid for in terms of the workers' transportation coming into the country and what was reimbursed. And again, probably the third or fourth time I've said it, but all of these types of things are streamlined through software. And they're the types of things that software is very well equipped to address versus a filing cabinet or notes on a piece of paper on a desk. So this is a really important topic. It's called corresponding employment. So if you're interested in H2A, really key thing to know is that if you employ domestic workers who are doing the same job duties as an H2A worker, then through the government's lens, they're considered what are called corresponding domestic workers, and they're obligated to have the same wage rate as the H2A workers. So why does the wage rate differ? Well, obviously there's a federal minimum wage, there's a state minimum wage. But for H2A, there's actually a separate, it's called average effective wage rate, and it's the minimum wage for H2A workers, which is usually slightly higher than the standard minimum wage. And so this is something that the government really pays attention to because they do not want the H2A program to be disadvantageous to the US citizens who are working in agriculture. So again, easily solved by just having solid record keeping, having a platform that helps with this. But just an important thing to know for anyone that's interested in getting smarter about H2A. I'm going to gloss over this because this is pretty in the weeds, but the government requires a small amount of reporting around who applied to the H2A job. So when you participate in H2A, there's actually a job contract that goes up on a public website, and anybody can find that and apply to these jobs. Most areas, it's very rare to have domestic applicants. It's kind of interesting. There was actually a requirement in the program for about 10 years that every employer had to proactively run physical newspaper advertisements. And then surprisingly, they actually did the study that found that millions and millions were spent on these newspaper advertisements, and there were like 7 people who ever were hired and showed up to work. So they've made it so the employer does not have to proactively recruit domestic workers. But because that job contract is publicly available, you still may get workers that come in, and then our system reminds you to track those, and we add it into that audit file that Michael mentioned. Then worker records, so pretty standard stuff here where you need to have records of the worker's name, their date of birth, but then also some specific items pertaining to the worker's relationship with H2A. So if you terminated a worker for any reason, you can mark that in our system, that goes into your audit file, and then we take care of the mandatory government communications around terminating workers. And then I think finally, but probably most important, is payroll records. So you just want to have very comprehensive records on the work performed each day, who was paid what, and it relates back to the corresponding employment issues. If you do get audited, the government wants to make sure the H2A workers were paid what they were supposed to be paid in accordance with the job contract. All right, so just to wrap everything up, H2A on the surface looks a little bit intimidating, but it's very doable to ramp up on all of the knowledge that you need very quickly. And it's much easier if you're partnering with someone like Seso, especially since we have a software platform that brings structure to all of this. And then really the key thing is to be prepared. So, learn the program, use the software, keep good records, and then you're in great shape and you've set yourself up to have predictable, reliable, highly motivated labor. And part of the reason that we started the company is it is also a great experience for the workers. So as Michael said, the workers come in, they send usually about 80% of the money home, where it goes a lot further. And we have a team in Mexico that conducts like pretty extensive interviews with workers because we're trying to improve the experience for them as well when we serve our customers. And what we frequently hear is you get like young people in their 20s that do H2A for 3 to 6 years, and it like actually meaningfully changes the trajectory of their lives. They can buy property, they can buy a house. They're from an area where there just was no opportunity. So we're really excited to try to educate employers on the value of the program, accelerate the adoption, and then simultaneously accelerate the knowledge about these job opportunities that exist in the U.S. To the population in Mexico who's really eager to try this program. So that's all we had prepared. Hopefully it was somewhat near the right level of detail given most of the audience is not super familiar with H2A. But yeah, happy to answer any questions on the labor crisis in the U.S. generally for agriculture, the H2A program, how we think about better serving our customers.
Could you repeat the question? There is not a minimum requirement. So we work with an ostrich farmer who brings in 1 woman, and then we work with a labor contractor that brings in 6,000 workers. Yeah, so they allow for a joint employment model. It's a slightly more complicated application, but it's doable. One of the most important things is on your application, you're going to list the work sites. If somebody works on a work site that's not listed on the application, you're in big trouble. So if you're pooling it and you do it correctly and you use a joint employment model or a labor contractor, you're fine. It's only if you try to fix it later, that's the issue growers face. So we probably wouldn't do this on stage, but there's like a government fee structure, and then there's a fee to pay an immigration lawyer or an agent like us, and then it just depends like what services you need. But on average, you might pay $400 or $500 for transportation per worker, $190 for the visa, and then a few $1,000s for the application. But we'd be happy to walk you through not just our pricing, but the pricing of the program as a whole, so that you can kind of put together the numbers and figure out, okay, what would the productivity increase need to be for there to be a return on my investment? I would have to double check on the Philippines. There's definitely a list of countries restricted. I don't think the Philippines are still restricted, but I'll double check that. Any country, like all of the Middle East is restricted, for example. But to answer your question, I mean, we bring in workers from 10 countries. Mexico is about 85-90% of the program. But Jamaica, El Salvador, Guatemala, South Africa, Ukraine are all big users of the program as well. Philippines is still restricted. Okay, it's still restricted. Sorry, say it one more time. You said CLR races? I'm not sure what that means. Oh, okay. good question. I don't have an answer to that. I mean, there's different safety trainings, but you're saying the workers bringing in produce? Got it. That would all probably fall under your responsibility as the employer. Okay. Got it. Okay. That's. Yeah. Yeah, so every state has different safety requirements when you bring in workers. So I would assume there's something in place, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. We could talk offline about that. Yeah, so the housing requirements are different in each state. I think the federal law is like 50 square feet per person. But it's going to depend, like during COVID, they had new rules around beds 6 feet apart that differed from state to state. I think those rules are no longer relevant, but it's about 50 square meters per person. Most states allow bunk beds. A lot of people are using motels and hotels that they're retrofitting to be accommodating for workers. But yeah, housing is definitely like one of the biggest concerns of most people entering the program. And then you have to get obviously the housing inspected before you can get approval to continue applying for the visa. Meters.
Yeah, and one more thing on the housing requirements. It's a little bit nuanced depending on the state. So whether the workers require 50 square feet for their sleeping area or 100 square feet, it can depend on how many square feet of common living area there is. So that's why we would want to do it individually. But generally, it's pretty straightforward guidance that the states provide. And then as part of the actual application process, what happens is you make an application to what's called the State Workforce Agency. For anyone who doesn't know who that is, it's known as the SWA. And the State Workforce Agency will help schedule an inspection. So every year, the government will come inspect the housing, and that's a requirement to get the visa approved.
And it's feet, not meters. Apologies. Yeah, thank you for your time, guys.
Thank you for that. Michael and Jordan will be available for more questions, so seek them out. Few announcements. Please visit the trade show next door. Silent auction closes at 1:30, so get your bids in. The dinner has been moved to Rays on the Bay, so join us there at 6 p.m. Rays on the Bay is the restaurant in the resort on the water where we had the cocktail hour on Thursday. So it's within the property. 6 p.m., presenting HCA's first Lifetime Achievement Award and our Legislator of the Year Award. We'll have remarks by Congressman Kai Kahele. We're going to break now for lunch till 12:45, and we thank Maui Oma for the lunchtime coffee. Thank you. Also, on your table is the HCA Board of Directors candidate statements. You can download those with the QR code.